When I first began my leadership journey and pursuit of my degree in organizational leadership, I held a much different view of what the responsibilities and role of myself as a leader were and what true leadership really looked like for me. Prior to diving into and studying applied coursework, I would describe myself as a good leader and most oftentimes a great leader, but not necessarily effective given the knowledge that I now have. I had a very one-dimensional view of leadership. I associated leadership with legitimate and expert power. To me, I guess previously a title meant somebody was a leader. And I didn't really have a significant differentiation between the role of manager and the role of leader. I just used the two terms interchangeably and assumed that that's all that they were. As a leader, previously I was very respectful of boundaries. I was not a big risk taker because to me, pushing back or being overly adaptive and maybe stretching outside of boundaries could be possibly interpreted as insubordination. And that's the closed-minded view that I had with that one-dimensional view of leadership. I definitely did recognize the importance of making connections with my followers and my peers and creating buy-in and showing personal investment in those that I work alongside and who I'm leading forward in my organization. And I did work to promote a positive culture in my organization as well. Training for me was a very small aspect and a very small fraction of my job. I really had a very heavy reliance on the training departments and human resources departments within my organization to facilitate training and develop organizational members and to help them move forward. And I was also very reliant on the tools and tactics that were developed by the organization. Taking on the project and task of creating a personal leadership strategy, it helped me to obtain a greater knowledge and understanding of the elements that define organizations. It also presented me with the opportunity to be reflective on my journey as a leader, where I was and where I hope to be, and shift to a more forward-thinking mindset to help me align my goals and my plans for the future. I realized in creating a personal leadership strategy, even though I was diving into more the application of my role as leader, that it helped me to be exposed to the elements of an organization and to realize that they have many different dimensions and how important it is to view an organization not just as incremental parts, but more as a whole with interconnected parts, where each working part has to collectively have a collaborative effort and come together to help reach strategic goals and hit those target outcomes. I have found in my leadership strategy quest that the best way to create a leadership strategy is to adopt principles from various different theories and use them in a combination for the most effective leadership practices. It's very important to have systems in place in order to develop leaders that may be ineffective, who you are working toward training and bringing up within your organization, and also to have those systems in place to remove those ineffective leaders. And that's not a great part of leadership, but that's something that I was allowed to explore in the personal leadership strategy. I worked to give some time and intentional thought to my own development, and I'm very well aware that I need to be reflective on my own journey and my own goals and have those established before I can help and develop somebody else and work to grow other leaders. After I had obtained a clear understanding of the definition and characteristics of organizations as well as leadership, my coursework took me into the study of quantitative data and the various different ways that it can be used to help an organization thrive. I learned that data must be carefully collected, and you have to work to eliminate the potential for bias, and also on the flip side that you can use data to identify bias in certain areas, for example, testing. Data is a great tool to help us more effectively meet target outcomes that support our strategic goals and our organizational vision. And the key takeaway from my data analysis projects was probably that data is useless without proper analysis and application. So for one of my projects, I was able to take raw data from a business that I was not familiar with. We weren't even given the name of the company. And to take that raw data and sort through it, slice it, dice it, look for patterns, and get it all organized, and then work through and give reasons why and investigate why there were peaks and valleys in certain dimensions of the data, and then to make a recommendation for this organization based on some of the research that I had done. And I realized what an invaluable tool that data is. It helps to predict growth, to quickly spot correlations, and to help identify opportunities in areas that need support or improvement within your organization. Taking time to analyze 2 case studies allowed me the opportunity to see the impact of leadership on the vitality of an organization, as well as the implications of exercising questionable ethical practices. And first, looking into leadership, it's not simply about the traits and qualities that a leader possesses, but also about the leadership approach and style when evaluating the need for and implementing change. A true leader is somebody that's going to have a very high awareness of the key importance of followership and how it affects their role as a leader. So basically, somebody has to be very aware that if there are no followers, that takes away that person's role as a leader. Leaders are able to exercise empowerment. For those out there working to develop, and a great way to do that is to establish teams within your organization and just trust them to make decisions and to take on tasks. And that helps to cast a shared vision, which will ultimately produce a higher success rate in the development of followers, and helps to achieve goals within the organization. One of the case studies that I did allowed me to follow a transformational leader and evaluate some of the things that he did to turn an organization around. And one of the things that this leader, Carlos Gosen, did was he removed layers within the organization and took out some of the complexity, which again is one of those responsibilities of a leader that is not easy. It's not an easy decision to make, and it's not easy to cut jobs and to alter power structures in order to promote key people and remove ineffective ones from their current roles. The course of action that he took helped him to cultivate a culture of greater transparency, and ultimately people within the organization ended up sharing information, and the turnaround was very successful. Communication as well should be two-way, and it shouldn't just go from the top down, but should be encouraged and accepted from the bottom up as well. In transitioning from the topic of leadership to ethics, I believe that ethics should always be an underlying presence for a leader, and that a leader should always be very well aware of their ethical beliefs, practices, and principles. And this is especially important even when there are strict rules, guidelines, and standards that have been implemented in their organization. A leader has to be able to weigh out the magnitude of their actions and decisions, even when they're following protocol, and stretch that into the ethical repercussions, and think through to evaluate outcomes and the impact that they're going to have not only on those within the internal organization, but the far-reaching impact on stakeholders as well. And a great way to search out wins for that is by practicing corporate social responsibility. That way you are making decisions as a leader and taking action that will provide a positive benefit for all stakeholders in your organizational decisions. In my ethical beliefs, I believe that a focus of servanthood helps to pair well with corporate social responsibility, and looking at those outcomes not just within the organization, but extending outward as well. And I've also adopted key elements from different ethical principles such as Confucianism and utilitarianism, and combining those has been a best practice for developing my ethical beliefs and practices as a leader. A large part of leadership responsibility goes beyond just follower development and operational management tasks, but also includes actively participating in continuous improvement measures and constantly seeking out opportunities to better your organization and to capitalize on those opportunities. In creating a SWOT analysis for the organization of my choice, I found that is a great tool and a way to help you identify and recognize the impact of driving internal and external factors. Internally, cultures of organizations are constantly changing, and innovation can sometimes be stifled either because of ineffective leadership or other internal drivers. And this is when your production and effectiveness can stagnate. And then externally, you have factors coming at you that are forcing your organization to be more dynamic, like resource availability, competition, trends, laws. Those things are continuously changing. And it's so much better as a leader to have practices in place so that you are proactive to those external factors versus reactive. When taking the time to consider and evaluate the need for change within your organization, it's important to step outside of the change and think through to the end result after change implementation and what that's going to look like, and establish whether or not the change should happen or if the change should possibly be brought about in a different way. And a great identifier for that also when you're crafting a change management process is using a cost-benefit analysis. And that helps to weigh out the pros and cons of a potential change, as well as the cost of outcomes, which may be monetary or otherwise. And the most important thing when moving forward in a change process is to create a climate for change so that you are casting a vision for a big picture mindset within your organization and sharing the way that not just the organization wins, but all of the members win as well. In working through the steps to create a change management plan, I was exposed to the interconnected parts that have to all come together in order for a change to be cemented in the organization beyond implementation. If an organization becomes steeped in an old and inflexible, outdated culture, they are at a very high risk of being bought out or going bankrupt, and that's really the bottom line. First and foremost, when considering a change management plan or change management process, a leader needs to be sure that they assess the culture of the organization and look at implications and the degree of resistance that they're facing before deciding to move forward with the change and choosing the best way to move forward with the change. Using another great tool, the strategy culture matrix, can help to find the most influential way to move forward with a change. I also, in the change management plan research, was introduced to the field of organizational development and how that is a study and profession that is entirely dedicated to increasing organizational effectiveness. The most important part of a change management plan after implementation is establishing a system to be in place for continuous improvement, because if you don't take measures to constantly seek for improvement in your organization and take a proactive approach in some of the factors that are happening internally and externally, then your changes are going to come undone every single time. In performing a strategic case analysis, I took a 360-degree approach to evaluate the health and success of an organization and synthesized research paired with knowledge that I have gained as a result of my studies in organizational leadership. I was able to examine the history of an organization from the beginning to where it is now, utilize a SWOT evaluation as a tool to take a look at internal and external factors and opportunities. I was also allowed to assess the effectiveness of the organization and measure how close they are in achieving their strategic goals, to track goal progress from the birth of the organization to the current state and see how their progress is, and also to take a look at some of the lessons that are learned or that can be learned from the ineffective processes that have occurred within the organization and some of the elements that help it to differentiate itself from other organizations that are in the same industry. finally, toward the end of the strategic case analysis, I had to argue whether or not the organization's mission and purpose were even worthwhile. But perhaps the greatest takeaway from diving into a strategic case analysis was some of the footwork that I did beforehand. As a student, I reached out to members of local organizations and had interviews and meetings with them just to get some of the ideas of their leadership practices and strategies, and to just have some situational experience that they wanted to share and that I could possibly use in choosing an organization to perform a strategic case study, but also to maybe borrow and adopt some of their practices that may help me be more effective moving forward. And one of the greatest takeaways was just that these leaders that I met with, they carved time out of their very busy schedules to meet with me, and they were very engaging during our time together. They took time to ask what my plans were, and where I hoped to come out, and what level of leadership that I wanted to achieve as I move forward in my journey. They also offered advice as I prepared to navigate even further in my leadership journey. And that really stuck with me because they were members of an organization. They took time to help somebody who was outside, and they also looked for opportunities for ways to develop me just in that very small amount of time that we met, and offered advice and showed genuine care and concern for my development and future as a leader. And I think that that's something that I want to carry with me and to make sure that I am practicing as well as I move forward into my next chapter of leadership. That brings me to today, and how I am as a leader today and what that looks like. I feel that I now have a greater sense of self-awareness and who I am as a leader. And I'm also very aware of some of the growth opportunities that I have, and I need to be actively seeking ways to continue to achieve the next levels of leadership. My organizational outlook has adapted, and it allows me to view all parts as interconnected. So I don't necessarily see training as the responsibility of my training department and my human resources department. Yes, they facilitate trainings, and yes, they provide me with great training tools, but ultimately that responsibility is mine, and that is a much larger percentage of my role as leader than I initially thought that it was. And all of these inner working parts within the organization have to come together in a collaborative effort to make sure that my organization is successful, and that starts with me as leader. As a leader, I also realize that it is not only my job to look for strengths within my followers and the peers that I am associated with in my organization, but also to utilize the path goal theory and make sure that I am working to help those people remove beliefs and either restructuring or completely removing obstacles that are hindering their success. So a lot of times we think, oh, this person would be a great leader, they have these traits. Or this person is very, very adaptable and coachable, they're going to be great in a leadership role. And so we look for those traits, but then we forget that somebody can have all of this potential, but there may be some sort of belief or hindrance that's holding them back, and to be sure to be aware of that and look for those and remove those obstacles so that they can achieve their next great level of leadership. I am much more confident in empowerment and delegation. I understand that a certain level of risk has to happen in order to foster the opportunity for growth in those that I'm leading. And I do feel more accountable and take greater responsibility for my role in the success of not only my organization, but also those that I'm leading. In looking ahead to where I need to go from here, I think that it's most important that I keep a forward-thinking mindset and maintain a personal process for continuous improvement. Just as we expect organizations to be dynamic and constantly evolving, I think that it's important to remember that as a member of an organization, or many organizations, not necessarily just the one that I work for, but religious organizations, volunteer organizations, school organizations, etc., to apply the same flexibility and adaptability to my own personal development and my own leadership strategy. And also remembering that just because I crafted a personal leadership strategy 6 months ago, that is not over with, that my personal leadership strategy has to be adaptive. It has to go through a change management plan, and it should go through a series of continuous improvement, and the processes that I evaluated should be adapted and changed and bettered. I need to be actively seeking out challenges that help to promote growth. I need to step outside of my comfort zone and work to push through boundaries that I've created, and myself practice that removal of beliefs that are hindering me from achieving my next level of leadership. I think it's important in today's world also that I'm constantly working to develop my relational skills, as we are in a global world and have contact with all different types of organizations that have various cultures, members of various cultures, members of various ages and generations, that it's important to be adaptive in your relational skills and always look for opportunities to be understanding and collaborate with all different types of people. I think that as a leader, I also need to be adaptive and create a climate that encourages creativity and innovation, and remember that risk is a part of growth and development, both for me as well as for other members in my organization. And in closing, as I look forward to a new chapter in my leadership journey, I will strive to not only grow and develop my peers and followers, but to reach even further beyond that and create a leadership legacy and work to grow generations of leaders for the future.